you guys are basically going to be doing this entire conversation about this book. I will not be saying anything or adding anything to the discussion. Now, those of you on the outside, if you're dying to, add something, I have some here. This is the hot seat, all right? And you can get up at any time and come over here and add something to the discussion, and then go back to your seat.
I was wondering what we thought about their minds had been starved by their cruel masters and they had been shut up into mental darkness. That was on page 79. How, I'm thinking it meant, they had been ignored and had become depressed.
Slaves were also were taught that slavery was right, as can be seen on page 97, when Douglas states, "To make slaves content, it is necessary to make them believe that slavery is right. This can be done only by preventing them from thinking." So education was taken away from them, so they had to listen to their masters and they couldn't speak up for themselves.
That was on page 37. It says, a quote said, "Education and slavery were incompatible with each other." So that means a slave couldn't be educated and still work as they should.
Yeah, they have a greater chance of running away if they're educated to devise a complicated plan in order to get away successfully.
Yeah, and if they were educated, they would be able to read, and they would probably read the master's newspapers and then learn some information on how bad slavery is.
Yeah, he says, he has a quote on page 39 that said reading was more of a curse than a blessing, and he envied the slaves for their ignorance and not knowing the true horrors of slavery.
And going with that, if they thought it was such a risk to educate slaves, why on page 77 did he devote? He said, "I devoted my Sundays to teaching my beloved fellow slaves how to read." Why did he take the risk?
In this day and age, we take education for granted. Back then, people didn't have, slaves didn't have the right to be educated, while here today we are sitting here discussing about that.
Without education, Douglas wouldn't have understood slavery and what was going on in his life, and he wouldn't have been able to escape and learn about how to escape.
And the reason that he learned to read was because he ended up going to the city, which I thought was crazy how in the city they had more rights and freedoms, to travel. They were allowed to walk around to different stores, and they were better clothed and better fed, unlike the people on the plantations.
If you're in a desolated place by yourself and with a bunch of other people, no one's gonna criticize you if they don't know what you did. In a city though, everybody judges you on what you do.
Yeah, more on that. The slaves in the trade were just generally treated better because the owners didn't want to appear cruel and neglectful to the non-slave holding other white people that were in the city. So but if they exercised their cruelty just freely, then people would probably judge them, and then they could probably see the horrors of slavery. But by not being as cruel in the city, people didn't know how bad slavery was and didn't try as hard to stop it.
Going on the exercising the cruelty about in the appendix on page 111, it says, I have nothing against Christianity itself. I recognize the greatest possible difference between the two because I have the pure, peaceful Christianity of Christ. I hate the corrupt, cruelty Christianity of those who support slavery. He was saying that the slave owners overuse Christianity and make it as if instead of when they beat their slaves, they say it was their God-given destiny to have slaves, and that the slaves were there to that God gave them the slaves to work in their fields.
And going back to what Isabella said, she said they overused it, but I think they misused it. They used it they used religion as an excuse to be cruel, and I think they took advantage of it. On page 111 through 112, they said people who wield the blood-clotted whip stand in the pulpit on Sunday. So I think that's a representation of slave owners were cruel to their slaves, but claimed they were religious, and I think they misused it.
Thomas Auld, at page 52 stated that he was whipping a lady, and he said he took a quote from the New Testament stating, "He that knoweth his master's will and doth it not shall be beaten with many stripes." So he used Christianity to his advantage, which was not the correct thing to do.
Also on page 52, it says that Thomas Auld found excuses for his cruelty in religion. So he basically used religion as a cover-up for all of his bad deeds he did.
Frederick, even though he was disgusted in how the white slave owners would use Christianity as a cover, he was a Christian man and he loved it, but he was just he hated the fact that it was also his favorite, his religion was being used as something that he was completely against.
All right, very good. And I definitely feel that some of you on the outside are probably dying to speak. So I think it's going to switch.
If I could switch the conversation over to slave songs and why they sung them. On page 11, Douglas says when he arrived in the North, he heard that people thought slaves would sing out of happiness, but it was actually the opposite. And on page 13, it says, slaves sing most when they are most unhappy. The songs of a castaway on an island are like the songs of a slave, and they're promoted by the same emotion.
Yeah, on page 12 it actually says that every note, and I quote, "Every note was a testimony against slavery and a prayer to God for deliverance from chains." And I think that's why they were singing. They were kind of just asking for deliverance from all the cruelty that they were suffering.
I thought that the slave songs were actually kind of a form of civil disobedience because they weren't allowed to complain about their masters, and if their masters found out they were complaining about them, they would get in major trouble. But by singing, they could complain as much as they want without getting in trouble. And it wasn't hurting anyone, but they could rant as much as they wanted in a form of a song and would be fine.
Bottom of the paper, go ahead and add what you still like to say. What is the most interesting thing your partner said? What would you have liked to say in the discussion? What would you have liked to have added just now? Go ahead and write that, because we've got 2 minutes. And I was going to have you guys staple all of your papers together and turn them in.